My name is Claire Whitmore, and I am 68 years old. I live alone in a small, sunlit house on the edge of our sleepy suburban town. It's the kind of place where neighbors wave politely from their driveways, and the mailman knows your birthday. My husband, Richard, passed away 7 years ago, and since then, the house has been mine, and mine alone. I used to think it felt too quiet here, but I convinced myself that the silence was worth it because my daughter, Emily, and her young family were happy. I spent my retirement taking care of them in all the ways I thought a good mother should, babysitting at a moment's notice, cooking every holiday meal, paying off debts they never thanked me for. When Emily and her husband bought their new home last year, I even gifted them the cabin in the mountains, fully renovated and paid for with the last of my savings. I told myself it was a legacy of love, a place for them to build memories with my grandchildren. So when my phone buzzed one quiet Wednesday afternoon, I didn't expect my life to split into a before and after. The text glowed on the screen, short and cold. "Hi, Mom, about the family cabin trip. My wife thinks it'll be easier if it's just us and the kids this year. We hope you understand." I read it 3 times. My only child, my daughter, the one I had given everything to, was uninviting me from the very place I built for her. I sank into the kitchen chair, the cool wood pressing against my back. My hands trembled around the phone. A single thought pulsed through my mind, cold and sharp. I was good enough to give them everything, but not good enough to be family anymore. I typed one word back: okay. The word carried every ounce of my hurt, my disbelief, my quiet rage. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Something I didn't even know was still alive. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't beg. I would remember. Because one day soon, this soft, invisible mother they thought they owned would be the last person they'd want to underestimate. The next morning, I woke to a quiet house that no longer felt like home. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the kitchen clock, sounds I once found comforting, now pressed on me like the weight of betrayal. I sat at the small oak table by the window, the one Richard had built decades ago, and stared at the cold cup of coffee in my hands. I thought about the cabin, the lavender curtains I had sewn by hand, the nights I spent sanding the floors while Emily sent me cheerful texts like, "Thanks, Mom. You're the best." I had worked like a woman possessed, telling myself every blister and aching joint was a gift of love for my family. And now, I wasn't even invited to walk through the front door. I got up and wandered the house. The hallway walls were lined with photographs. Emily's graduation, her wedding, birthdays, the family vacations I had funded when money was tight. I paused at a photo of the cabin's porch, taken last spring. Emily was holding a glass of wine, laughing at something her husband said. I was behind the camera, as always. Invisible. Essential, but invisible. By noon, I found myself in the guest room that used to be Emily's childhood bedroom. It was spotless now, staged like a hotel room for the rare nights she and the kids stayed over. I opened the old wooden closet and pulled out a plastic bin filled with her keepsake's ballet shoes. Honor roll certificates, a tattered stuffed rabbit. I ran my hand over them, feeling that familiar ache of a mother's love, the kind that never fully fades, no matter how much it's bruised. But there was something else beneath the ache this time, a quiet ember of resolve. I sat back at the kitchen table and whispered to myself, enough. For years I had been soft. I excused the last-minute cancellations. I ignored the missing reimbursements. I told myself I was lucky to be needed. But being needed wasn't the same as being loved. I picked up my phone, scrolled to the last message Emily had sent me, and read it again. "We hope you understand." I did understand. I finally understood everything. That night I called Martha, my oldest friend, the only one who had seen through the cracks before I ever admitted they were there. Her voice was calm and warm. "Claire, I knew you'd call. Tell me what happened." I told her about the text. I told her about the cabin. I told her how empty the house felt now that I could finally see the truth in it. When I finished, There was a long silence. Then Martha said softly, "Ani, they don't deserve you." But I think it's time they realize that. I gripped the phone tighter. I think you're right. That night, for the first time in years, I didn't fall asleep as a tired, invisible mother. I fell asleep as a woman with a plan I didn't fully understand yet. But I knew it had already begun. The next morning, the world outside looked the same. Sunlight spilling across my small front yard, the neighbor's dog barking at the mailman. But inside, everything felt different. I brewed a pot of coffee, poured a cup, and carried it to the kitchen table. My hands hovered over my phone for a moment. No new messages, no apology, not even a polite check-in. It was as if I'd been erased overnight. I opened my laptop. For years, I'd let Emily handle the online accounts. She'd insisted it was easier that way. "Mom, you shouldn't have to worry about boring stuff like bills. I'll take care of it for you." At the time, I thought she was being thoughtful. Now, that memory left a bitter taste in my mouth. I typed in my login for the bank. I had to reset the password because I couldn't even remember the last time I'd used it. The page finally loaded, and my chest tightened as the numbers came into view. The balance wasn't what I expected. Not terrible, but thinner than it should have been. I clicked into the transaction history. The 120 cabin supplies, 300 home maintenance, 250 miscellaneous services, small amounts at first. Enough to hide in the fog of everyday expenses. But then I scrolled further back. 500 emergency repair, 800 contractor deposit, and all of it, every single transfer, had been authorized by the secondary user on the account. Emily. A cold heaviness settled in my stomach. I wanted to believe this was a mistake. I wanted to call her and hear her say, "Oh, Mom, don't worry. That was for the cabin. I'll reimburse you." But deep down, I already knew. She wasn't going to reimburse me. She wasn't even going to admit it. I closed the laptop and looked around my quiet kitchen. The walls I had painted myself. The curtains I had sewn while thinking of Emily's family visiting more often. All the little touches of love I'd poured into this place and into her life. And now, those same hands had signed away pieces of me without hesitation. That evening, Martha came over with a small bag of groceries and that sharp, knowing look in her eyes. "You've been digging, haven't you?" she asked, setting the bag on the counter. I nodded, my throat tight. "She's been taking from me, Martha," quietly. "For months, maybe longer." Martha put a hand on mine. "Then it's time to stop letting her." I looked at her, really looked, and saw no pity there, only resolve. For the first time in my life, I felt it echo inside me. "I will," I said, and I meant it. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The grief was still there, thick and heavy, but it had hardened into something sharper. I brewed my coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop again. This time, I wasn't just looking, I was hunting. The bank statements told a quiet story of betrayal. Small transfers first, 120, 250, slipping out of my account under the cover of household expenses. Then larger ones, 800, 200. All signed off by Emily Whitmore, secondary user. I scrolled further, my breath slow and even. The pattern was clear, always on Friday evenings. Always labeled as something innocent. Always leaving me just enough to stay unnoticed. I sat back in my chair and let the numbers sink in. The woman I used to be, the one who would cry silently, maybe call and beg for an explanation, was gone. I pulled out a small leather notebook and started to list steps to protect myself. Gather every receipt and bank statement. Photograph every suspicious transaction. Speak to a lawyer about financial protection. Stay silent. Let them believe I'm still blind. At 10 a.m., I called Martha. Her voice was warm, but when I told her what I'd found, it cooled into steel. "Claire," she said quietly, "they're not just ungrateful. They're planning something. You need to move fast." I stared at the empty mug in my hand. "I think you're right. I don't even know where to start." "You start," Martha said firmly, "by remembering that you are not weak. And then you let a lawyer do the rest." That night, I stood in my living room, looking at the empty spot on the shelf where the family photo used to sit. I whispered to the quiet house, "I gave you everything. Now I'm taking myself back." And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like armor. I woke before the sun the next morning. The house was dark, and for a moment, I lay there listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator down the hall, the creak of the old pipes. This house had always been my sanctuary. Now it felt like a witness, a silent keeper of every sacrifice I had made. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and felt the chill of the floorboards on my bare feet. Somewhere deep inside me, a part of me whispered, "It's time." In the kitchen, I made coffee and stared out the window. The street looked the same, neighbors jogging, a school bus rumbling by. But my world had shifted overnight. The soft, gullible mother I had been for decades was gone. In her place was someone I didn't quite recognize, a woman who had been hollowed out by betrayal, and in that hollow space, something sharp was growing. I thought about Emily, her polite texts, her sweet smile that masked calculation, the way she used to press a kiss to my cheek while quietly moving my life into her control. For years, I told myself it was love. Now, I knew better. It was strategy, and I had been her easiest game. By mid-morning, I was standing in the lobby of Dalton and Reeves Law, clutching a folder of bank statements and receipts so tightly that my knuckles ached. The receptionist gave me a sympathetic smile when she saw my face. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, steady but low. "But I need to speak to someone about family and finances." Today. Minutes later, I was seated across from Mr. Dalton, a man in his 70s with silver hair and kind but calculating eyes. He reminded me of Richard, my late husband, except colder, sharper. The kind of man who wouldn't let anyone take advantage of him. "Tell me what's happening," he said. I inhaled slowly, forcing the words out. "My daughter, she's been using my accounts without permission. Small transfers, maybe bigger ones I haven't found yet. She had me sign something last year. I didn't read it. She said it was just for bills." His eyebrows drew together. "Do you have a copy of what you signed?" I shook my head. "No, she kept it. Said she'd file it safely." Mr. Dalton leaned back, fingers steepled. "Mrs. Whitmore, there's a chance your daughter gave herself durable power of attorney. That would give her control over your finances, potentially even your property, if she structured it correctly." My stomach dropped, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I saw Emily's face in my mind, smiling, soft, sweet, the same face that had hugged me last Thanksgiving while her hand might as well have been in my pocket. I whispered, "She could take everything." He didn't sugarcoat it. "Yes, but only if you do nothing. If we act now, we can revoke access, lock down the accounts, and create a paper trail of every unauthorized transaction." I sat there frozen, my hands clasped in my lap. The guilt came first. She's your daughter. She has children. Maybe you're overreacting. Then came the fear. What if she's already taken more than I know? What if I lose everything Richard and I built? But beneath the fear, something new stirred. Something dark, something resolute. I thought of the text that started all of this. "We hope you understand." Yes, I understood now. I straightened my back. "What do you need me to do?" Mr. Dalton's mouth curved into the smallest hint of a smile. "Bring me everything. Bank statements, receipts, texts, emails, anything that proves a pattern. And one more thing," Mrs. Whitmore's silence. "If they don't know you're moving against them, you'll have the advantage." When I walked out of that office, the autumn air felt crisper than ever. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking like a mother waiting to be loved. I was walking like a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for existing. And somewhere deep inside, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not fear. The night after meeting Mr. Dalton, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling as shadows from the streetlights sliced across my bedroom. Every creak of the house felt like a whisper of all the years I had given away. I thought of Richard, my late husband, and the nights we'd stayed up dreaming about the future. Back then, I imagined a warm, loving family, holidays at the cabin, grandchildren running down the hallways, laughter spilling through the rooms I had poured my soul into. Instead, I got this: a daughter who saw me not as a mother, but as a stepping stone to her perfect life. My heart ached, but this time the ache was sharper. It had an edge. By 5 a.m., I was in the kitchen, the smell of coffee rising like armor around me. I pulled out my laptop, logged into the bank again, and opened a fresh notebook beside me. This time, I wasn't just a hurt mother. I was a detective in my own life. Transaction by transaction, I built a map of betrayal. 100 cabin supplies, 300 home repairs, 500 emergency maintenance, 800 contractor deposit, each small cut bled into the next. A trail of quiet theft masked as responsibility. And then, I found something that made my breath catch. Scheduled payments, there they were. 5 future transfers, totaling over 15,000, all scheduled within the next 6 weeks. Destination joint account Emily and Daniel Whitmore. The realization hit like cold water down my spine. They weren't just taking my money. They were building an exit plan, quietly bleeding me dry so that by the time I noticed, it would be too late. I gripped the edge of the table as a wave of emotion surged through me. Not just betrayal, not just grief. Rage. Cold, calculated rage that didn't burn, it froze. For the first time in my life, I felt a terrifying clarity. I called Mr. Dalton as soon as his office opened. "Claire," he said, his voice alert. "I found scheduled transfers. $15,000. They're emptying me in installments." A pause. Then, calm steel, freeze every account today. I'll file the paperwork to revoke any prior authorizations immediately. By the afternoon, it was done. Every joint access removed, every transfer blocked. Every future attempt would trigger a notification, directly to me. I sat in the dim light of my kitchen, hands clasped, waiting. The silence in the house no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like the calm before a storm I was finally ready to control. At 9:03 a.m. the next day, my phone buzzed. Her name lit the screen. I let it ring once, twice, then I answered. "Hello? Mom?" Emily's voice trembled with forced calm. "Something's wrong with the bank. Our contractor payment bounced." "Did you change something?" I swirled my coffee, letting the pause stretch long enough for her to feel it. "Yes," I said, my voice soft but unshakable. "I decided to handle my finances myself. It's simpler that way." A stunned silence. I could almost hear the panic rising in her chest. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt powerful. The day after I froze the accounts, the world outside my window was deceptively calm. Sunlight spilled across the quiet street. Children laughed on their way to school, and inside my kitchen, my phone sat like a coiled snake, waiting for the inevitable. It rang at 9:07 a.m. I answered on the second ring, my voice light. "Hello, Mom." Emily's voice was tight, high-pitched, panic wrapped in fake sweetness. The payment for the contractor bounced. Our mortgage auto pay failed. Did something happen? I leaned back in my chair, cradling my coffee like it was a trophy. "Yes," I said simply. "I decided to handle all my finances myself. It's simpler this way." There was a pause, and I heard her muffled whisper to Daniel in the background. Then she came back on the line, her tone sharper. "Mom, you can't just do that." "We need access for the cabin, for the bills." I cut her off, calm and precise. "You needed me, and I was always there. But let's be honest, Emily, you didn't need me. You just needed my money." The silence that followed was thick enough to feel. I could almost hear her jaw clench. Then Daniel's voice boomed from somewhere behind her. "Claire, this isn't fair. We've been handling everything for you. You agreed to let us manage the finances. We've been protecting you, protecting me." The words hit me like a match striking gasoline. Not because they hurt, but because they confirmed everything I had finally admitted to myself. They weren't protecting me. They were protecting their access to me. I let the silence hang for a long, cold moment before I replied. Protecting me would have meant telling me the truth, not hiding transfers, not setting up payments to your account behind my back. Emily inhaled sharply. Mom, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, I said, my voice low and steady now. And from this moment on, I will protect myself. You don't get to make decisions for me anymore. When I hung up, the kitchen was silent except for the faint tick of the wall clock. But it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence I'd known before. This silence felt sharp, electric, like the moment before a storm hits, when the air itself holds its breath. I realized then that I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was hunting, calmly, methodically. And my silence was the first trap I'd set. The day after that call, I woke before dawn. The air in the house felt different, charged, alive, like it knew I was no longer the same woman who had once begged to belong. I brewed a strong cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop. I logged into my accounts with the new credentials Mr. Dalton had helped me set up. No one but me could enter now. The numbers stared back at me, cold and exact. For a moment, my pulse quickened, fear and rage twisting together. I clicked on scheduled payments again. They were still there, 3,500 next Friday, 2,000 2 weeks later, 4,200 the following month, destination. Joint account, Emily and Daniel Whitmore. Each line was a knife, and every knife had my name on it. They weren't just taking. They were planning to drain me dry. I started digging deeper, clicking through archived statements I'd never looked at before. And then I found it. A transfer for 10,000, labeled home renovation deposit, 3 months ago. I stared at the destination account, my stomach sinking. It wasn't a contractor. It was a private investment account under Daniel's name. I leaned back, gripping the edge of the table. It wasn't just theft anymore. It was premeditated. By noon, I was in Mr. Dalton's office again. The folder of evidence had doubled in thickness. He flipped through the statements, his expression tightening with every page. Finally, he looked up at me, his voice low. Claire, this isn't just financial abuse. This is fraud. And depending on how they've been moving the money, maybe even criminal conspiracy. The words didn't scare me. They thrilled me. Can we stop them? I asked. He leaned forward, his eyes sharp. Not only can we stop them, we can make sure they never see it coming. First, we finalize the account freezes and document every unauthorized transfer. Then, we revoke any power of attorney they've slipped into your life. After that, we take the evidence to the bank, the state, and if needed, the police. When I left his office, the autumn wind whipped around me, carrying the scent of dry leaves and cold steel. I wasn't the invisible mother anymore. I wasn't the woman waiting for a kind word that would never come. I was a storm they didn't know they had summoned. And somewhere on the other side of town, I imagined Emily's perfect little life, blissfully unaware that the ground under her feet was already cracking. The next morning, I put my plan into motion. I woke before the sun, the house still wrapped in that strange new silence I had grown to love. It was no longer the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of control. I started with the accounts. Every card Emily and Daniel had ever touched, disabled. Every recurring transfer they'd set up, canceled. I set alerts for every penny that moved. By 800 m, my finances belonged to me again. Not a bank clerk, not my daughter, not her husband, just me. At 9:12 m, my phone rang. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello, Mom. Emily's voice was tight, sharp, the mask of sweetness cracking. Our payments are bouncing. The mortgage, the contractor. Even the utilities. Did you do this? I sipped my coffee, letting the pause stretch like a blade between us. Yes, I said calmly. I decided to protect myself. It's simpler this way. Her breath hitched, and I could hear Daniel in the background, his voice rising. This is insane! We've been managing everything for you! You can't just. I can. I cut in, soft but final, and I did. There was a long silence on the line, broken only by the faint hum of my refrigerator. For years, I had been the one holding my breath, waiting for scraps of affection. Now it was their turn to drown in that silence. Finally, Emily spoke again, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. "Mom, you don't understand what you're doing. You're going to ruin everything." I felt my lips curve into a small, cold smile she couldn't see. "No, Emily. I finally understand exactly what I'm doing." And I hung up. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with a single lamp casting a soft pool of light, the rest of the house swallowed in shadow. On the coffee table lay the folder Mr. Dalton had helped me prepare. Bank statements, screenshots, emails, and my hand-written notes tracing every betrayal like a roadmap to the truth. The silence in the house felt different now, not heavy, not lonely. It was alert like the air before a storm breaks. At 6 a.m., I called Mr. Dalton. "I'm ready for the next step," I said, my voice calm and deliberate. "Good," he replied. "We'll file for a full financial protection order today. And I'll have a private investigator start checking for hidden accounts or assets they might have moved without your knowledge." Hidden accounts. I repeated, my stomach tightening. "Yes," Dalton said. "People who steal like this rarely stop at one trick. If they've been siphoning funds, there's a chance they've opened accounts, moved assets, or even borrowed against your property." By noon, the investigator, Mr. Hayes, a man with a quiet, hawk-like demeanor, sat across from me at my kitchen table. He opened a slim laptop and began pulling up records faster than I could follow. Then he paused, his eyes narrowing. "Mrs. Whitmore, you should see this." He turned the screen toward me. There it was, a loan application for $250,000, filed just 2 weeks ago. Collateral listed my cabin. Applicant Daniel Whitmore. The blood drained from my face. They were going to take a loan on the cabin I gave them. Hayes nodded. And they planned to finalize it next week. If you hadn't frozen the accounts, the lender would have approved it. I sat very still, letting the betrayal settle like ice in my veins. But then Hayes scrolled further down, and the real twist hit me like a punch. Attached to the loan application was a supporting document, a signed power of attorney dated 6 months ago. It had my name, my forged signature. I stared at it, my chest tight, my fingers trembling. Emily hadn't just manipulated me into signing things, they had forged my signature. The room was silent except for the faint hum of Hayes' laptop. I thought of every holiday, every smile, every "thank you, Mom" that had hidden a knife. For years I had believed love would protect me, but love had been the weapon they used to make me defenseless. When I finally spoke, my voice was cold steel. "Get me everything?" I said. "Every account, every document, every move they've made." Hayes nodded slowly. "By the time we're done, Mrs. Whitmore, they won't just lose access. They'll face criminal charges." That night, I sat in the dark living room, the forged document on the table in front of me. The anger I expected never came. What came instead was clarity. A razor-edged certainty that the woman they thought they could erase was about to erase them instead. I whispered to the empty room, to Richard's memory, to myself, "They think they're clever. They think I'm weak. But this is my house, my name. And I decide how this story ends." I woke up the next morning with a strange calmness in my chest. The fear that had haunted me for weeks was gone. In its place was precision, the quiet confidence of a woman who knew exactly what she had to do. The folder with the forged power of attorney sat on my kitchen table. Every time I looked at it, I felt my spine straighten. This was no longer about family. This was war. At 8 a.m., I met Mr. Dalton and Mr. Hayes in the law office. Dalton spread the documents across the conference table like pieces on a chessboard. "We move today," he said. "We'll file a fraud report, revoke every authorization, and notify the bank and county office about the forged signature. Once this hits the system, they won't be able to touch a single asset. Not the cabin, not your house, not even a penny from your accounts." Hayes leaned back, a hint of grim satisfaction in his eyes. "And if they try, they'll trip over the paper trail we're building. It'll end with the sheriff at their door." I stared at the paperwork, then nodded slowly. do it, I said. Today. Dalton smiled faintly, like a general about to launch a battle he knew he would win. Then it begins. By noon, the wheels were turning. The bank had officially flagged every unauthorized transfer as suspicious. The forged power of attorney was logged as evidence, with my notarized statement confirming I had never signed it. The county clerk's office froze the cabin deed pending investigation. Emily and Daniel thought they were clever. They had no idea that, as of today, every step they took was inside a legal trap I had set. That evening, I sat by my front window, watching the pale light fade into dusk. Then, right on cue, my phone buzzed Emily. I let it ring twice before I answered. "Hello, Mom," she said, her voice tight. "The bank just called. They said there's an investigation on our accounts. Our cards aren't working, and the cabin. What's going on?" I let the silence linger, savoring the moment. Then I spoke softly, each word deliberate. "I know what you did, Emily. The transfers, the loan application, the forged signature." On the other end of the line, she gasped. Mom, you don't understand. No," I said, cutting her off with the same calm that had once made me invisible. "I understand perfectly. And for the first time in my life, you don't control me anymore." She started to speak again, but I ended the call. I sat there in the dim light, feeling a satisfaction that was colder than joy but sharper than any grief I had ever known. The first blow had landed, and it was silent, surgical, undeniable. Somewhere across town, Emily and Daniel were scrambling, panicking, realizing that the world they thought they owned had already slipped through their fingers. The next morning, I woke before the alarm, as if my body already knew what had to happen today. The house was cold, quiet, and steady, like me. I brewed coffee, the bitter scent filling the kitchen, and glanced at the folder of evidence sitting on the table. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was freedom. It was justice. Today was the day I would move from defense to attack. At 8 a.m., I met Dalton and Hayes again. Hayes slid a thin stack of new documents toward me. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, voice calm but sharp, "you were right to move quickly. We've confirmed 2 more things. Daniel and Emily opened a second credit line using your social security number. They listed your cabin as collateral for a $250,000 loan they hadn't disclosed to the bank." I stared at the paper, my jaw tight but steady. "Are we sure?" I asked. Hayes nodded. "The applications are signed with the same forged signature we found on the power of attorney." They thought you'd never notice. A chill ran down my spine, but it wasn't fear. It was clarity. I looked at Dalton. "What happens if we file this now?" His eyes glinted like steel. "They'll be locked out of every account. The loan will be flagged as fraud. And if they try to move a single dollar, the authorities will be notified immediately." "But, Claire," he leaned forward, "this will be the point of no return. Once we pull this trigger, there's no going back." I thought of Emily's face, all the fake smiles, all the time she called me Mom, like it was a weapon, sweetened just enough to hide the blade. I straightened my spine. Pull it. By noon, it was done. The bank froze their joint account. The credit bureau flagged their fraudulent loan applications, and the county clerk officially placed a fraud alert on the cabin deed, ensuring that even if they tried to sell or refinance, it would be blocked instantly. The silent trap had been set. At 4:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. Not a call this time, a video call request. I almost didn't answer. But something inside me wanted to see it. I accepted. Emily's face filled the screen, blotchy from crying, her voice breaking. "Mom, what did you do?" "The bank called us. They said there's a fraud report, and we can't access anything. They're talking about police." "Mom," behind her, Daniel's voice rose, harsh and panicked. "This is insane. You're ruining our lives." I let the silence stretch just long enough for the weight to crush them. Then I spoke, soft but deadly calm. "No, Emily, you ruined your own life. I just stopped you from taking mine with you." She shook her head, tears streaking down her face. "We were just trying to make things easier for all of us." I felt a laugh rise in my chest. Not warm, not amused, just sharp. You tried to erase me while I was still breathing. You thought I wouldn't see the papers, the loans, the forgeries. But I see everything now. Daniel tried to interject, but I held up a hand toward the camera. Don't bother. The bank knows, the county knows, and the next people who call you will be wearing badges. I ended the call. For the first time, I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel pity. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the sun slip behind the houses across the street, my house, my life, mine again, and somewhere across town. The perfect little empire Emily and Daniel had built on my trust was crumbling, brick by stolen brick. The twist wasn't just that I had taken everything back. The twist was that I was never going to be their victim again. The morning after I ended that video call, the world outside my window felt new. I brewed coffee as usual, but this time I drank it slowly, savoring the warmth on my tongue. The silence in my house no longer felt like absence. It felt like ownership. My phone was quiet. No texts. No calls. I imagined Emily and Daniel in their perfect little house, pacing the floor, waiting for a miracle that wouldn't come. At 10:00 a.m., a notification pinged on my phone. I opened it to see a bank alert, suspicious withdrawal attempt, $1,000 joint account declined. A slow smile spread across my face. I could almost hear Daniel's voice yelling, Emily crying, the walls of their carefully constructed life beginning to crack. This was the moment they realized. The leash they'd wrapped around my neck for years had snapped. And now, they were the ones gasping for air. I spent the rest of the morning with Mr. Dalton and Hayes, finalizing the paper trail forgeries logged with the county and bank, fraudulent loan attempts documented, a request for an injunction to prevent them from accessing any of my assets or properties. Dalton leaned back in his chair after signing the last form. Claire, by the time this is processed, they won't be able to sneeze near your money without the bank calling me first. Hayes added quietly, and if they try to push back, they'll face criminal charges before they can blink. I nodded, but a part of me felt hollow. Powerful, yes. Protected, yes. But beneath it all was a grief so deep it ached in my bones. Emily wasn't just my daughter. She was the last piece of family I had left, and she had burned that bridge herself. I thought of Richard. I imagined what he would say if he saw this, saw what his only child had become. The ache in my chest deepened, but I didn't let it shake me. That evening, I was washing dishes when headlights swept across my window. A car door slammed, then another. And then the knock. It wasn't polite. It was angry. I dried my hands, inhaled slowly, and opened the door. Emily stood on my porch, her face blotchy, her hair a tangled mess of panic. Daniel loomed behind her, fists clenched at his sides. Mom, Emily started, her voice breaking between anger and desperation. We need to talk. Right now. I leaned against the doorframe, letting the porch light cast a shadow that made my stance feel taller, sharper. I think we already have, I said. Daniel stepped forward, his voice rising. You can't just destroy our lives like this. The police are calling. The bank froze everything. We could lose the house. Do you even care? I felt something shift inside me then. A click. A release. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel small in front of anyone. Not even my own child. I tilted my head slightly. You mean the house I helped pay for? The accounts you drained behind my back? The loan you tried to take out on my cabin? Emily flinched. Her voice was barely a whisper. Mom, please, we thought. No, I said, cutting her off. You didn't think. You calculated. And now, you live with the calculation. Behind me, my living room was warm and quiet, my sanctuary. Behind them, the night air bit cold, their fear visible in every tremor of their hands. In that moment, I understood something. I didn't need revenge to feel powerful. I just needed freedom. I closed the door. The lock clicked. And for the first time in my life, I felt untouchable. The next morning, the phone rang before I had even finished my first sip of coffee. I recognized the number, the bank's fraud department. Mrs. Whitmore. The voice on the other end said, calm but firm, "We've completed the review of your case. The transfers, the forged power of attorney, and the fraudulent loan attempts have all been documented. Per protocol, we've escalated the matter to local law enforcement for further investigation." I closed my eyes briefly, letting the words wash over me. Not fear, not guilt, only relief. By mid-morning, Mr. Dalton called to confirm what I already knew in my bones. "Claire," he said, "the county has put a legal hold on the cabin, and the investigator has submitted evidence of forgery and attempted fraud. If they try to contest anything now, it won't just be civil. It'll go criminal." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "And when they come here?" He paused. "They'll come, out of desperation or anger. But Claire, the moment they step out of line, you call me, or the police, you are untouchable now." That evening, the inevitable happened. A black and white police car rolled slowly down my street and stopped in front of Emily's house 2 doors down. I watched from behind my curtains as 2 officers walked up the driveway, their flashlights cutting through the early night. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the body language, Emily's frantic gestures, Daniel's hunched shoulders, the quiet, helpless shake of his head. My chest felt heavy and light all at once. This wasn't triumph. It wasn't joy. It was justice, and justice was never pretty up close. Hours later, when the street had quieted again, I stepped out onto my porch. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of leaves and wood smoke. I looked up at the night sky, clear and sharp with stars. And for the first time in years, I felt peace. Richard would have told me to protect myself long ago. He would have warned me that love without boundaries isn't love. It's surrender. I whispered into the night. I finally listened, Richard. I finally listened. Inside, the house felt different. Not just safe mine. Every photograph, every piece of furniture, every corner of this house that had once reminded me of what I'd lost, now reminded me of what I had taken back. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a woman reborn. And tomorrow, I would wake up to a world where Emily and Daniel would finally learn what it meant to live without me. The next morning, I woke to a strange, almost electric stillness. The storm had passed, but the air felt charged, like the world itself was waiting for my next move. I brewed coffee and carried it to the kitchen table, where a thick envelope from Mr. Dalton waited. Inside were the final papers: revocation of all power of attorney and joint account authorizations, asset protection orders, a proposed sale of the cabin. Not to Emily, not to anyone she could touch, but to a neutral buyer who would finalize it in cash. I traced my finger along the edge of the contract, my chest tight. Selling the cabin felt like closing the last chapter of the life I had imagined. Holidays, grandkids running barefoot through the halls, family dinners that never really existed the way I dreamed. I whispered to the empty kitchen, "I gave you everything, and you turned it into a weapon." At 10 a.m., Dalton arrived with the notary. We sat in my quiet living room, sunlight spilling across the coffee table, where the documents lay like the final pieces of a chess game I had already won. "Claire," Dalton said softly, "once you sign these, it's done. Emily and Daniel will have no legal claim on anything you own. The cabin will be sold. Your finances are locked. This is your clean break." I looked down at the pen in my hand, my reflection faint on the glossy table surface. Memories flashed in fragments, Emily as a little girl, holding my hand on her first day of school. Emily as a bride, crying happy tears I thought were real. Emily, smiling sweetly while sliding papers across the table, saying, "It's just easier this way, Mom." My chest tightened. This signature wasn't just legal, it was emotional surgery. I inhaled deeply, steadying my hand. The pen touched paper. Claire Whitmore. The first signature felt like cutting a chain. The second, a weight lifting from my shoulders. By the third, I realized my hands weren't shaking at all. When the final page was signed, Dalton collected the papers with quiet efficiency. "It's done," he said. "You're free." That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, the city lights flickering in the distance. The cabin would soon belong to someone else. Emily and Daniel's access to me, financial or emotional, was gone, and for the first time in my 68 years, I felt what true freedom was: not running away, not hiding, just owning myself completely. I closed my eyes and let the quiet wrap around me like a soft blanket. They had gambled everything on my silence, but my silence had been their undoing. I whispered into the night, to Richard, to myself, I am finally free. 3 days after I signed the final papers, the world outside felt lighter. The autumn sun cut through my window, warm against my skin. For the first time in years, I woke up without a knot in my chest. I brewed coffee slowly, letting the quiet stretch. No buzzing phone, no anxious waiting, no weight of expectation pressing on my shoulders. I was free. By noon, the news reached me, not from Emily, but from Mr. Dalton. Claire, he said over the phone, his tone calm but edged with gravity. Emily and Daniel's joint account is officially closed. Their loan applications have been denied, and the fraud investigation has been escalated. The bank also issued a formal legal notice that they may face criminal charges for forgery and attempted theft. I listened in silence, staring out my kitchen window at the rust-colored leaves swirling down my driveway. How did they take it? I asked quietly. Dalton hesitated for a moment before replying. They've hired a lawyer, but there isn't much that lawyer can do. The paper trail is airtight. If they push, we'll counter with everything we have, including the forged signature and the investigator's report. I exhaled slowly. It wasn't joy I felt, it was release. That evening, my phone buzzed. A message from Emily. The first since I closed the door in her face. Mom, we lost everything. The house, the cabin, the accounts, they're gone. I know we were wrong, but please, we're your family. Please don't let it end like this. I stared at the screen, feeling the echo of the woman I used to be. The mother who would have dropped everything, forgiven everything, just to feel needed again. But she was gone, buried with every forged document and every quiet betrayal. I typed only 3 words. Take care, Emily. And then I placed the phone face down on the table, my heart steady. The next morning, I packed a small bag and drove to the cabin one last time. The air in the mountains was crisp, smelling of pine and wet earth. The cabin was almost empty now, stripped of their chaos and my heartbreak. I walked from room to room, tracing my hand along the walls, feeling decades of memory pass through my fingertips. In the living room, where I'd once imagined Christmases and laughter that never came, I stood still for a long time. Then I whispered to the empty space, I release you. When I drove away, I didn't look back. The road wound down the mountain, the sun setting in shades of gold and fire. I realized I wasn't just leaving the cabin behind. I was leaving the old me behind. The woman who lived for scraps of love, who confused being needed with being valued. I was reborn in my own silence. Back in my small house that night, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window. The street was quiet. The stars were sharp and clear. I wasn't waiting for a call. I wasn't afraid of who I was without them. I was whole and finally untouchable. The weeks after Emily and Daniel's downfall passed quietly. No more phone calls. No more texts. No more weight pressing on my heart whenever my phone buzzed. I had imagined that freedom would feel like fireworks. Instead, it felt like sunlight on an empty kitchen table, soft, warm, and mine alone. I built a new routine. Morning walks through the neighborhood where leaves crunched under my shoes. Afternoons reading on the porch with a blanket and a pot of tea. Evenings where the only sound was the clock ticking on the wall and the quiet hum of my own thoughts. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living for someone else's approval. I was living for me. One Saturday, I drove to the mountains again. Not to the cabin, which was now in the hands of a kind young couple, but to a hiking trail Richard and I used to love. The air was crisp, and the pines swayed gently as I climbed the path alone. Halfway up, I paused to watch a hawk circle overhead. I thought of Emily, not with anger this time, but with clarity. Love doesn't excuse betrayal. And forgiveness doesn't mean handing someone the knife to hurt you again. Richard's voice came to me in memory, steady and warm. You can love your family and still protect yourself. I smiled at the sky and whispered, I finally learned. Back home that evening, I set a small photo of myself on the mantel. Not Emily, not the grandkids, just me smiling in the sunlight free. For decades, I had been the invisible foundation under everyone else's life. Now, I was the center of my own story. Love without respect is a prison. You cannot save someone who only sees you as a resource. Silence can be power. When you stop defending yourself to people who never listen, you take your power back. It's never too late to choose yourself. Whether you're 28 or 68, you can walk away from betrayal and start over. I used to think my mother was weak, too soft, too giving, too easy to control. I thought I was smarter, more practical, more ruthless when needed. I thought I could outgrow her, outplay her, outmaneuver her. But now, sitting in a cheap motel room with Daniel passed out beside me, his phone buzzing with unpaid bills and attorney voicemails we couldn't answer, I realized the truth. I didn't just lose my mother. I lost the last person who ever truly believed in me. The fall happened faster than I imagined. First, the bank froze our accounts. Then the lawyer said the fraud case might escalate to criminal court. Our friends stopped answering calls. The neighbors whispered. Even Daniel's parents suggested we take some time apart. We sold the SUV for a fraction of its value just to cover the next month's rent. I pawned my engagement ring. And still, I couldn't stop thinking about the way my mom looked at me that night. Not angry, not cruel, just done. That look shattered me more than the bank notices or the eviction letters. Daniel blamed her, of course. He called her names, accused her of betrayal, said she was cold, calculating, cruel. But I knew better. The truth was, we were the cold ones. We were the ones who drained her, used her, smiled while signing things behind her back. We were the betrayal. And now I couldn't escape the echo of her voice saying, "You calculated. Now live with the calculation." One night, I walked to the edge of the motel parking lot. I stared up at the stars, just like I used to do as a little girl when she and I would lie on blankets in the backyard, making up stories about constellations. I whispered into the wind, "Mom, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. But I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." My breath shook, and I let the tears fall. No performance, no excuses. Just grief. I haven't heard from her since that last text. 3 words, "Take care, Emily." It felt like both a blessing and a door closing forever. But if I'm being honest, she gave me more mercy than I deserved. She didn't press charges. She didn't ruin us. She just let us ruin ourselves. And maybe that was the most painful punishment of all. You don't realize you're draining someone until they're gone. Entitlement feels like love, until the consequences show up. There's no worse silence than the silence of someone who finally chose themselves. It came on a Wednesday, a pale blue envelope, tucked in my mailbox between grocery ads and a water bill. The handwriting was shaky, uncertain, but unmistakably hers. Emily. For a moment, I stood frozen on the porch, the autumn wind curling around my ankles like a cat unsure of its welcome. I didn't open it right away. I made tea, sat in the quiet of my sunroom, let the envelope rest on the table as if it might decide to walk away on its own. But it didn't, so I opened it. "Mom, if I had one word to say to you, it wouldn't be help. It wouldn't be please. It wouldn't even be forgive. It would be sorry. I don't know if it matters to you now. I wouldn't blame you if it didn't. But you deserved better. You deserved a daughter who protected you the way you protected everyone else. A daughter who didn't confuse kindness for weakness. I didn't just lose your money, or the cabin, or the things I thought I needed. I lost you. And that will haunt me longer than any court ruling ever could." Daniel's gone. I think he was only ever in love with the version of me that used to make things happen. I don't make things happen anymore. I sit in a tiny apartment, eating from paper boxes, wondering how I became this version of myself. The one you warned me about. I don't ask you to write back. I just ask that you live. Fully, bravely, like the strong woman I now know you are. Because if one of us is going to rise from this, it has to be you. Love, Emily. I read it 3 times. Then folded it gently and placed it in a drawer. Not out of anger, but out of finality. I wouldn't reply. I didn't need to. Her words weren't for redemption. They were a confession. A quiet offering. A small stone placed at the altar of everything broken. And it was enough. That night, I took a walk down the street. The stars above me were clear, the air cool and sharp. I passed homes lit softly from within, each one humming with its own private world. And for once, I felt no need to be in any of them. I had a home again, inside myself. I didn't win with revenge. I didn't destroy her. I didn't become cruel to prove a point. I won by walking away, by reclaiming what was mine, by choosing silence when they expected a scream. Protecting your peace is not cruelty, it's clarity. You are allowed to walk away, even from family. When staying costs your soul, justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through the quiet of a door finally closed. Not every apology needs to be accepted. Sometimes, acknowledgement is enough. Have you ever walked away from someone you loved because staying meant losing yourself? Claire's story isn't just hers. It's the story of every woman who gave too much and finally said, no more. Share your story in the comments. What did it take for you to finally choose yourself? Subscribe to Telling Story with me for real stories that don't sugarcoat the cost of peace.